Notre Dame quarterback Riley Leonard underwent ankle surgery recently, and now he's going to miss the remainder of winter conditioning. But what impact will it really have on the quarterback competition? That's coming up next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Wednesday, January 31st, and thank you for making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum, producer covering college football for Fox Sports, and this show is free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts so you can watch or listen. But whether you're watching or listening doesn't matter to me. Just please take a moment to hit that subscribe button if you have not already. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Tuesday ended up being a pretty newsy day for late January in the college football calendar. I'm going to be honest. When I woke up and I started planning for this show, I had something else completely different in mind. And then we found out that Michigan is in hot pursuit of Notre Dame's Director of Recruiting, Chad Bowden, and they want to hire him for their staff. And then later in the day, we found out that Notre Dame quarterback Riley Leonard underwent ankle surgery earlier this month, likely 2 weeks ago, and he is likely going to miss the remainder of winter conditioning and potentially even a little bit of spring practice. And that's really where I want to start with today's episode, because there were a lot of conflicting reports. We had a good old-fashioned source-off going on Tuesday afternoon, and Blue and Gold's Tyler Horka, Blue and Gold also a partner with On3, he was the first to break this story around 4 p.m. Eastern, and it was a big surprise to a lot of people. But in his initial report, he stated that this was a new injury to his left ankle, not the one that he suffered a severe ankle sprain on Duke's last drive against Notre Dame last season. Pretty soon after that report came out, we got some conflicting reports from like Irish Sports Daily, Irish Illustrated, Pete Sampson of The Athletic. He came out and they said that it was more of a cleanup procedure on the ankle that he hurt against Notre Dame last season. And those reports were all but confirmed when Rob Hunt, Notre Dame's head athletic trainer, quoted the initial report from On3 and said, quote, "Story not accurate, do better," end quote. Now, I know that a lot of people were coming down hard on Horka and Blue and Gold, and I understand why some people were upset. He did get it wrong in his initial report, but he did change it. It happens sometimes. I like Horka. He's been on this show before. But now at least we're all in agreement. We know what happened to Riley Leonard. He did have surgery. He is likely going to be out for the next 6 to 8 weeks, and there's really no way to spin this as a positive if you're Notre Dame. It's certainly unfortunate that Leonard is not going to be able to go through winter conditioning and whatever workouts that the players decide to do outside of their regularly scheduled practice time to work out and get some reps with the receivers, even though it's going to be on air. It's still valuable time for Leonard to develop that connection with his new teammates. I will say, though, that it's encouraging that they're getting this done now, because this is probably the best time to do it on the calendar. I mean, it's January 30th. The season is 8 months away. Spring practice is probably more than 8 weeks away. So odds are Leonard is going to be ready to go by the start of spring practice. Will he be 100%? We're going to have to wait and see on that. But we do know that he's going to miss the rest of conditioning, and that odds are he's going to be able to play in the spring game on April 20th unless something else comes up. Now, let's go back to the tightrope surgery and what exactly that is. So we know that it was on the same ankle that he hurt last season, and he was recently seen walking around the Notre Dame campus on crutches. The tightrope procedure that Leonard allegedly had, that was actually made famous back in 2019. If you remember, Tua Tagovailoa, the Alabama quarterback, underwent the same procedure during the season that year so that he could be ready before Alabama took on Joe Burrow's LSU Tigers in a classic 1-versus-2 matchup. It was one of the greatest college football games of all time, and I think to this day it's the best college football game that I have ever been to. It was just a classic, two heavyweights going at it, so many future NFL players on that field. The recovery time on Tua's surgery was really quick. It was accelerated because he had hurt it during the season. He was trying to get ready to go for that game. And at the time, it was relatively new. We hadn't really heard that much about it. And I think a lot of people were skeptical, like, wait, he's going to have surgery and be back in a couple weeks? And that's exactly what happened. I think he ended up throwing for over 400 yards in that game. But according to the Southern California Orthopedic Institute, Quote, the purpose of the tightrope procedure is to stabilize an ankle after an injury, usually a high ankle sprain, which damages the soft tissue structures between the tibia and the fibula and causes the bones to separate, end quote. That would make sense when we think back on the time that Leonard initially suffered the injury. As I said earlier, it was against Notre Dame, and it was on September 30th of 2023. Duke had a bye the following week, and then Leonard missed the following game against NC State. So he was out for 2 weeks, and then he tried to give it a go against Florida State 3 weeks after he initially suffered the injury against Notre Dame, and he actually played decently well in that game for the most part until he re-aggravated that injury in the second half. You look at his stat line, it's not great. He finished 7 of 16 passing for 69 yards in a pick, but Duke was actually up by 3 before he left the game. Then they brought in the backup, and then Duke ended up losing to Florida State 38-20. Then Leonard tried again the following week against Louisville, and if you watch that game, you know it was tough to watch. Like, I felt legitimately bad for Leonard. He couldn't really move back there. He was basically a statue. It took away pretty much all the things that he was great at, and he got killed. He got sacked 4 times in that game. Duke lost 23-0, and that was the last time that Leonard would ever suit up for the Duke Blue Devils. So it's really not that surprising to me that there are still complications from that initial injury. He was seriously hurt. I mean, when he went down against Notre Dame, the way that he was sort of just rolling on the ground in pain and the way that the other Duke players were reacting, and then he was in the medicine tent and he came out on crutches. Like, I'm going to be honest, I thought it was broken, but it ended up just being a high ankle sprain, which is still a significant injury, and he tried to give it a go, and it didn't work, and then he actually made things worse probably in that Florida State game and the Louisville game as well, because he kept going out there, and I think on one hand, that shows you how tough of a dude he really is, but it also shows you how serious that injury really was. I'm not sure if this was his first procedure on that ankle or not. I haven't seen anything definitive one way or the other. My guess is that it's probably the first time he's gone under the knife for this issue, and I think it's in everybody's best interest for him to get this taken care of now as opposed to waiting it out and potentially needing it later, because if Notre Dame had decided, well, let's see, maybe he doesn't need the surgery, then he could make it worse in winter conditioning, or he could go out in spring practice and complicate it even further. Then that could require a more intensive surgery, and maybe that recovery time is a lot longer. Obviously, in an ideal world, he's not injured at all, and he can be a full participant in all of winter conditioning, but that's not the case, and that's okay. I still think that over the course of these next 2 months, Leonard can still learn plenty about Mike Denbrock's system in a classroom while he rehabs the injury. Sure, you'd like to be able to have him go out there, throw with the receivers, but he still has plenty of time to work with the receivers on that. This really is the best time to do it. He gets it done now. Yes, he misses winter conditioning. He's going to have to probably ramp back up into football shape during spring practice, which is not going to be an easy thing to do, even though he's the quarterback and he's not going to be getting hit like some of the other guys. Like, you have to be in football shape, and it's even harder to get in football shape when he's been basically out since the midway point of last season. So that's going to be a struggle for him, and he's got some ground to cover or to make up for sure. But I feel like if the Notre Dame staff looked at his ankle, was like, look, eventually we're going to have to get this figured out. Let's just do it now. Let's save ourselves some time and do it well before the season starts, because the most important thing is that Riley Leonard is 100% or damn near close to it when the Irish step into Kyle Field to take on Mike Elko's Texas A&M Aggies in the season opener. That being said, this is part of the risk. When you take a quarterback like Leonard, who put his body on the line, he puts his body on the line in the run game so frequently, it's great to have a dual threat quarterback, especially one who can run the ball as well as Leonard does until they get hurt. I still think that it's a risk you want to take, and Notre Dame is, and they should, because the ceiling for Leonard is so incredibly high, due in large part to his abilities with the ball in his hands as a runner. That being said, though, this might present a great opportunity for backup Steve Angeli and Kenny Minchi, and I'll explain why right after this. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. What I love most about the Super Bowl is everyone in the world stops what they're doing to watch a football game. Like, how great is that? Even people who never watch football, they schedule their whole day around a football game, and I love that. Right now, I'm leaning Chiefs money line. I'm probably going to stick with that because my general rule as of last Super Bowl is to never bet against Mahomes. I didn't do it in the AFC Championship game. If you followed the show throughout last week, you know that I gave out Detroit +7. There was a moment there where I was a little bit worried about that, but we love a backdoor cover, especially after the previous 2 weeks went. So it's good to be back in the winner's circle. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3 because not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Now that we've addressed the actual injury to Riley Leonard, let's consider some of the implications from this because even though I still think Leonard is clearly going to be quarterback one, I think he's still going to be able to participate in spring practice and potentially have a good 3 weeks in his first real test out there with Notre Dame. There are going to be some effects from this, and I think the two people who are going to be impacted the most from this outside of Riley Leonard are the backup quarterbacks, or at least the projected backup quarterbacks, in Steve Angeli and Kenny Minchi. Let's start with Steve Angeli. His value to Notre Dame continues to rise, and it started in the Sun Bowl when he came out and he looked really good going up against Oregon State, and he showed that he belongs on that college football field. He looked calm. He made a couple bad decisions when he was like trying to hurdle dudes, and it led to a fumble, but still, the fact that he was so confident in his game to do that, I think speaks volumes, and I think with Riley Leonard hurt over the course of these next 6-8 weeks, however long it ends up being, the fact that Notre Dame has a guy like Steve Angeli who has started for them in the past around the program is huge. And I think that throughout the spring, we're all going to be kind of wondering, what is Steve Angeli going to do once spring practice ends? Is he going to jump in the transfer portal, much like Tyler Buchner did last year after he lost that quarterback battle to Sam Hartman, even though, you know, how extensive of a quarterback battle that really was? That, you know, I'm not sure if I really believe it was ever much of a competition, but I actually think that this is a little bit more of a competition than last year, given the fact that Angeli started the Sun Bowl. He looked really good, and I don't think that Riley Leonard is near the finished product that Sam Hartman was when Hartman came over to Notre Dame. And if you're looking at what the coaching staff at Notre Dame wants, obviously they want all of the quarterbacks to stick around, but especially Angeli because he's already been in the program for 2 years. He's going on his third year here, and let's say Leonard comes back at the start of spring. He's only about 70%. They'll feel comfortable having Angeli run the offense, and they won't really have to bring a new quarterback up to speed like Kenny Minchi. And even though Kenny Minchi has a really bright future, in my opinion, he's still really young and doesn't have much experience at all in the college game. Angeli is probably going to get more first-team reps in spring practice now than he would have if Leonard was completely healthy. Now, I don't think he's going to be getting the bulk of the reps or probably anything even close to that. But still, if Leonard is out or if he's 60% or whatever at the start, that's a great opportunity for Steve Angeli. And I wonder if Steve looks at Leonard's injury and his recovery process here, and I wonder if he thinks about the potential for there to be more injuries to Riley Leonard, given the fact just how he plays the game, right? He's a very physical runner. He takes a lot of hits, and it's part of what makes him great, but it also leaves him susceptible to more injuries like this one. And I don't know if Steve is like thinking, okay, well, if I leave, I'm looking at a starting job and only a starting job. But I would think that he's probably going to think that way. Now, last year when Tyler Buchner went from one quarterback competition that he never really had a chance into another one at Alabama where I also didn't think he really had a great chance to start there because they had Jalen Milroe plus Ty Simpson and Eli Lonergan as well, who since transferred to Alabama. But still, they kind of had a four-way race there for a little bit, and it made no sense to me at the time and makes even less sense to me now. So I think Steve Angeli, if he does decide to leave, he's probably going to want to go to a place where he can start immediately. And I just don't know how many teams out there are going to offer him that opportunity, at least at the Power 5 level. Like, I think there's probably plenty of Group of 5 teams who would be super stoked to have Steve Angeli on their roster, and he'd probably be the day one starter as soon as he got on campus. I don't know what he wants right now, but I think that he at least has to consider the fact that Riley Leonard could miss a few more games this season, not necessarily because of this injury, But maybe it is. Maybe this sort of thing lingers and it's sort of like a nagging ankle thing even after he has the cleanup procedure. Maybe that's enough to keep him around. I would say probably not, but it's something to consider. It certainly is not going to guarantee him any sort of starting job, referring to Angeli. But I think that it's another time for him to showcase to the Notre Dame coaching staff that, hey, no matter what happens with Leonard, if he's on the roster and he's healthy, Steve Angeli is a great option, and Notre Dame could absolutely win with him at quarterback, and he's going to have a chance to showcase that as well as his leadership for the entire team over the course of these next 2 months, because even though Riley Leonard's, there's still plenty of ways for him to be a leader on the team and showcase his skill set in that role, even though he's not going to be on the field and an active participant in the workouts. Like, anyone has ever gone through a really grueling group workout or team activity like that knows that it's a lot easier to be drawn to the guys who are actually in it with you than the guy on the sideline who's like, you got this, guys. Like, I appreciate it, but you're not really out here. You're not in the foxhole. You're not going through the grind together. And that's just the way it is, right? That's human nature. And I think that Steve Angeli could assert himself as even more of a leader over the course of the next 2 months. And now let's switch sides here. Let's talk about Kenny Minchi and his role in all of this, because he has nothing to lose right now. And that's not new. That's not a result of the Riley Leonard injury. But his eligibility clock in college starts this upcoming season because he redshirted this past season. Right now, he's probably the third quarterback on the depth chart, but he has 4 years left, and there's really no pressure on him to do anything right now. Like, he's not going to be asked to come in and be the backup, assuming Leonard is healthy. So really all he has to do is go out there and just do the best he possibly can and just work hard, and maybe he could jump Angeli, because when you've got nothing to lose, you might be the most dangerous guy out there because you kind of are carefree. You can be more aggressive. You can go harder in workouts, and I think that's a great way to impress all the other guys in the roster. Like, hey, this Kenny Minchi dude, like, he's serious. Not only is he really talented at throwing the ball, but he's a dog in winter workouts. And I think this is a great opportunity for him to showcase that. And if he is able to do that, he might actually have a chance to beat out Angeli, because I think Kenny Minchi has more natural ability. And the experience part is a big factor for sure. The fact that Steve Angeli's been around for 2 years compared to 1 for Kenny Minchi obviously gives Steve Angeli a big leg up. And Angeli is probably better than I gave him credit for much of last season. But the difference now is that Notre Dame has a new offensive coordinator, and Mike Denbrock. Like, Angeli, Minchi, and even Leonard are all learning Denbrock's system at the exact same time. They're all new to this, right? It's a clean slate. I think it's going to be a lot different than what Jared Parker was running and Tommy Rees was running the year before that. I'm sure that there's going to be some common elements. We know that Marcus Freeman wants more of a pro-style offense, but the offense is probably going to be a little bit more similar to what LSU or what Denbrock was running at LSU over the course of the past 2 seasons. It helped that he had Jane Daniels, the dual threat quarterback who eventually won the Heisman, and that his skill set certainly aligns more with Leonard's, but I think we're going to see a lot of those same concepts. And we know that Angeli can move a little bit, and Minchi can move too. He's not like a dual threat necessarily, but there's really not that many quarterbacks at any level, really, in NFL or college, who are just statues back there. You have to be an athlete. You have to be elusive in and out of the pocket, and you have to be able to make plays with your legs. So I think it's a fresh start for everyone, and that could really open a new door for Kenny Minchi. Ultimately, I do believe that one of these guys is going to transfer after the spring. I kind of go back and forth on who I think it will be. But for whoever decides to stay these next couple months, they're a great chance to be a leader while the projected QB1 is on the sideline. Maybe Angeli and Minchi are both fighting for that spot. And it's hard to lead from the sideline, like I was saying earlier. If Kenny Minchi or Steve Angeli really sort of asserts themselves over the course of these next 6 to 8 weeks while Riley Leonard is sitting out and he is really attacking his rehab, and I'm sure that there's plenty of ways for Leonard to impress his teammates in that respect, I do think that the guys who are actually on the field have a better chance, and they could really step up both in the eyes of the players and their coaches. And as they go through winter workouts, it's important that all of these guys do whatever they can to be a leader, because no matter who's the quarterback, come the fall when Notre Dame takes the field against Texas A&M, that person has to be a really talented quarterback and a great leader. We know that there's a lot of talent in that room right now, but we really don't know who's the alpha, who's the leader, because even though we all project Riley Leonard to be the starter, the situation is obviously complicated because of his injury, and it's going to be something that we continue to talk about here over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks and the course of the next 6 to 8 months, and probably a little bit longer than that. All right, coming up in segment 3, Michigan is going all out in their pursuit of Notre Dame's Director of Recruiting, Chad Bowden. Is he going to stay or is he going to go? Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if one of my family members or friends got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from the life-saving medication that they needed. Thankfully, Jace Medical is here to help. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. So on Monday, there was a little rumor that started to circulate on message boards at Michigan, I believe it was Michigan Insider, that the Wolverines, and specifically their new head coach, Sharon Moore, were actively pursuing Notre Dame's Director of Recruiting, Chad Bowden, for a high-level position on the staff. This all started because Sharon Moore followed Chad on Instagram. Quick aside here. Who are these people monitoring every person their coaches follow? Like, I know I don't have a life as I sit here in my garage by myself doing a podcast every single day about my favorite football team. I get it. I know that me saying, why don't you get a life, is awfully hypocritical coming from me. But still, I like to think that I have a little bit better things to do than just actively look at, like, who is Marcus Freeman following? Who is Marcus Freeman? Who is Mike Denbrock following? Now, I will say when Riley Leonard was in the process of transferring to Notre Dame, it did become a bit where everyone just would look at who he followed because usually it indicated who Notre Dame was going after in the transfer portal. I admit, I engaged in that conversation, but I have since put that behind me. But whoever it was, whatever Michigan fan was monitoring Moore's Instagram follows, they did find that he followed Chad on Instagram. So then the rumors started, and those rumors quickly turned into something a little bit more on Tuesday. Tom Loy from 24/7 Sports did confirm that Michigan was in fact pursuing Chad Bowden. Then there was Josh Henske, a Michigan reporter, who also reported the same thing. Sharon Moore was really aggressively pursuing Chad Bowden for a high position on their staff. We don't know all the details at this point, but I think it's safe to say that whatever title that Michigan would give Chad Bowden would probably be considered a promotion from his current title at Notre Dame, which, as I said earlier, is the Director of Recruiting, specifically high school recruiting. That could mean that he'd be in like a general manager role for the Wolverines. Now, general managers in college, they're not all created equal. As a matter of fact, the role of a GM at one school could be almost entirely different than what that same role is at another school. It's really a new position because even though we're familiar with the role of a GM for professional sports teams, it's kind of a new thing in college, and it's really a result of the transfer portal and NIL and things like that because the rosters are constantly changing. With all the responsibility that a head coach has, they need some help in managing their roster. And before, they had a little bit more control when there wasn't the transfer portal and NIL wasn't as big of a thing, or at least legally. Now you need a general manager who is constantly monitoring your own roster to see who's going to stay and who's going to go, and also the rosters around the country to see which players are going to enter the transfer portal. Because as Marcus Freeman said in a press conference at the end of the 2023 regular season, if you scout a player as soon as they enter the portal, you're already late and you're going to lose out in that battle. And that's really where the GM comes into play. So a GM is not just high school recruiting. That goes beyond, right? It's probably going to have a lot more to do with the entire team, the program, the personnel, all of that. So if Bowden was if he was gonna end up at Michigan and they were to give him that role, it'd be a big jump in title and responsibility and also financially. Notre Dame does not have a true GM on their staff right now. They did hire Butler Benton from Arkansas, and he was the general manager at Arkansas when Notre Dame hired him. But his title for Notre Dame is Assistant Athletics Director, Player Personnel. I actually thought he was like a GM at Notre Dame, and I was mistaken, and then I looked it up. And as I said, Notre Dame does not have a GM on the staff. Fans who follow recruiting pretty closely are obviously familiar with Chad Bowden. He's got endless energy. You see him in these videos. Most recently, he was dancing around in a leprechaun costume. Before, he was dressed up as a ref, and it could be 4 or 5 in the morning, and the dude is just like, he acts like he just drank 12 Red Bulls. And to me, there's times where I look at him like, what is his deal, man? He's a little bit out there. Some of the stuff he does is a little bit bizarre. But, hey, man, it works. It works for the 17 and 18 and 16 and 15-year-olds that Notre Dame is recruiting at the high school ranks, and that is all that matters. I might think it's a little bit weird that he was dancing around in a leprechaun costume, considering he's probably, I think he's much older than I am, but it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. Whatever works with those guys, the recruits, is all that matters in this, and Chad Bowden is really, really good at what he does. So Chad got a start at Cincinnati a few years ago, and then Freeman and him became super close right away, and they've been together ever since. Freeman brought him with him when he took the job at Notre Dame as defensive coordinator, and then promoted him once he became the head coach. So if Chad Bowden decides to leave, it's no doubt a big blow to Notre Dame, to Marcus Freeman, and specifically Notre Dame recruiting. But that being said, it's not quite as drastic as some fans are making it out to be. Notre Dame wouldn't lose a single commitment if he decided to leave. No recruit has ever committed to Notre Dame because they like Chad Bowden. But Chad does a really good job helping facilitate everything that goes on, and he keeps in touch with literally every recruit. He has a relationship with everyone that Notre Dame is going after. So he is a huge asset to the coaching staff, because when a position coach or a coordinator or the head coach, Marcus Freeman, they've got a million other things to do. Chad is always there to contact the recruits and make sure that Notre Dame is never getting outworked on the recruiting trail. That might be his most valuable asset, is he has an endless work ethic because, in my opinion, he just has endless energy. So he's very valuable to the team and to the staff, but he's not indispensable. If he does decide to leave, I trust that Marcus Freeman would be able to find a quality replacement in short order. But I'm going to predict this right now. I think he's going to stay. I think Chad Bowden is going to turn down the offer at Michigan and stay at Notre Dame. I think that Notre Dame is going to offer him a raise, maybe a change in title. Ultimately, I do expect him to stick around Notre Dame for the foreseeable future, really as long as Marcus Freeman is there. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, he'll have already made up his decision and he'll be headed to Ann Arbor. But I think Notre Dame is going to be able to match it, and I think that at the end of the day, his connection with Marcus Freeman is going to be enough to keep him around. And if that's the case, if he sticks around at Notre Dame, that is a big win for the staff. And it's also a great sign when these other schools, especially Michigan, even though we aren't Michigan fans, to say the least, on this podcast, we really don't like Michigan. They did just win the national championship. And I think it really says a lot that in Sharon Moore's first week as the head coach of the Wolverines, he's actively pursuing Chad Bowden as much as he is, because I think that shows you just how good he is at his job. Notre Dame's able to keep him. Another big win for the Fighting Irish and what has been a really good offseason up to this point. All right, that's going to do it for me today. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. I'll be back the rest of this week. I'm sorry that I was not able to get an episode up on Tuesday. I literally left my house at 7 in the morning. I did not get home that night until 11 p.m. My schedule worked out. I did not have a chance to record, but I'm going to be back every day. Remember to subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow the show on X at Locked On Irish, on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod, and follow my personal X account at Tyler, WOJCIAK. I'll see you guys tomorrow.